All right, we're going to go right to item 19 because of some obligations that folks have. So those of you that were ready to come on up, I know Mike Thompson and Mike DeRay, we'll go right back to that. But we're going to go right to 19, which is the investment beliefs. Belief number 8, Alan Emkin, PCA. We have investment belief 8, the alignment, choice A or B. Go ahead, Alan. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, members, Alan Emkin, PCA. The board went through a lengthy process to adopt 7 investment beliefs. That process incorporated lots of discussion, debate, and it also included a provision that for an investment belief to be adopted, it required a supermajority. It wasn't a simple majority, it was a supermajority, and that was because there was a sentiment that it should really reflect the overwhelming majority of the board if it was going to be a belief that reflected itself in the whole system. After the 7 were adopted, really towards the end of that process, an 8th belief was brought to the table regarding alignment. And we went through a couple of discussions on that. And where we are now is that there are 2 options. They're just like any other thing, subject to change. But at this point, it's really to get a sentiment or a sense of the board. Are you comfortable with either one of those? Or would you like to see some change in those? Recognizing that you don't have to have an investment belief on alignment. That wasn't part of the original plan, and if you don't get a supermajority, the result of that decision is that you just don't have a belief on that item. So you really have a choice of adopting one of these or one of these that has been amended in some manner, or not having a belief on alignment of all. And we were really happy with either one of these in terms from the perspective of being a consultant. But I urge you not to try to wordsmith today, because history has proven to me that when committees like this try to start changing language, it's not productive. So if the language is unsatisfactory, just send us back to the drawing board or tell us to stop.
Thank you. A question before we turn it over to Mr. Hunterman. Either A or B, will either one of those, adopting either one of those alignment beliefs, change the manner in which the portfolio is currently invested?
In my opinion, the answer is unequivocally no.
Thank you.
And that's not the intent.
I want to make sure that's reflected in the record, so that if in fact we do adopt one of these alignments beliefs, that it can no longer, someone cannot bring back an item and say, you know, we're investing in X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z, you know, their compensation structure is so high and it's misaligned with our beliefs, so we shouldn't be doing that. So I want to make sure that's reflected. Mr. Hunterman?
Thanks. So some of it is, this is sort of like an eye, you're the eye doctor, and which is clearer, A or B.
And you can never tell. I'm guessing.
We're getting older.
I think
so. This is a word change, but I think it has some substance. I think maximum alignment is either redundant or it's implying something about maximum that is more than we intend. For example, if the Blackstone Group, we had a great presentation from and we invest a lot of money with, if they establish a short selling fund, are we no longer in maximum alignment with them? And I think the answer would be yes. They have some interests that are just not aligned with our investment strategies. So if we can narrow ourselves to the alignment point, then that's good. And then in B, it strikes me, and if we all agree that the first sentence and the second sentence mean the same thing, I would be inclined to only have the second sentence to avoid the potential ambiguity. But I mean, I think it is our belief that we seek to provide alignment of our interest with our advisors and managers through our contracts. And we could say we're best served when there's such alignment, that's fine. But I think we have to make sure that there's not more meaning, penumbra, as lawyers would say, of meaning in the first sentence that extends beyond the second. And with that, I mean, I think we're very close.
So I think we need to make sure that what we're looking at here, we understand what we're looking at here is a belief, not a policy. So I agree with you, Tom. Maximum, I'm not quite sure how we can have a policy that says we have maximum alignment, but I think as a belief, it's not inconsistent to say that we're best served when there is maximum alignment. Now, that doesn't mean we're always going to get there, or that we always should get there, that there's going to be other factors. So, but on the other hand,
can I just respond? So I thought the example would that I gave would just say, no, we're not best served because we don't have maximum alignment. We wouldn't have maximum alignment with Blackstone, and we certainly wouldn't want to. I mean, I think our beliefs have to reflect how we invest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that your example actually causes a problem because, I mean, whatever Blackstone does in the rest of their business is up to them. It's in the work that they do with us that we care.
Right.
So that's why I think, but I think we're getting too detailed in trying to define a policy, which is what I think is the problem with the second sentence too. We're trying to say that we get to that we create alignment of interests by these 3 or 4 steps: clear contracts, specifying fees, and investment objectives and investment benchmarks. I mean, Harvey raised the question, which I think was a good one, is how do those things necessarily create alignment? That may be a vehicle by which we ensure alignment, but we could also have a contract that makes it clear that there is no alignment of interest, a contract that has conflicts of interest embedded all over it. So rather than start to list these things, I'm with you, Tom. We need one sentence. It's the first sentence we need, and I'm happy to take out maximum, but then just have option A.
So,
I'll make a motion to that effect, and I'm happy to take out maximum if.
okay, so there's a motion on the floor to adopt alignment belief A, striking the word maximum from it.
Second one.
Okay, is there a second? It's appropriately seconded. So currently there's a motion on the floor. There's a second on the floor. So the discussion is around investment belief A as adopting that. Does anybody want to comment on that? Or have an opposing view on it? Ms. Paquin, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We actually do have an opposing view on it. We prefer option B because we believe that it makes it clear that the alignment of interests is financial in nature and could not be extended to some other realm which would not be within our fiduciary duty. So I would want to offer a substitute motion and
Correct.
approve option B.
Okay, there's a substitute motion. Is there a second for the substitute motion?
I'll second it for purposes of discussion.
Okay, so the substitute motion is to adopt B as it's written, Ms. Paquin?
I would accept deleting maximum.
Deleting maximum, okay. I know that it appears at least once in B.
I think
Anywhere
twice.
else? Twice, okay. So deleting the word maximum. It's been seconded by Mr. Unterman. Ms. Dillon, what is the the procedure from here when there's a substitute motion?
We vote on the substitute and then because the motion vote comes on.
Okay, so we vote. Dana, help me with that?
If people get to debate the substitute first.
Okay, so we're gonna
So
debate
they need to
this.
speak to the substitute.
Okay, so people have to speak to the substitute motion. Mr. Unterman?
Yes, I'd like to propose an amendment to the substitute motion to insert the word such after create and alignment. To make clear that alignment means the same thing in each sentence.
So the second sentence in B, it says CalSTRS creates such an alignment,
Yeah, such alignment, yeah.
such alignment, okay? Is that friendly? Okay, it's a friendly amendment to the substitute motion, thank you. So the substitute motion on the floor is to adopt alignment B, striking the word maximum wherever it appears in B, and inserting the word such after the word creates in the second sentence. That is the motion as it appears currently on the floor with an appropriate second. So that has to be debated and then voted up or down. So anybody like to speak to that motion? Ms. Hendricks?
So Lynn, I just wanted to clarify, because you had mentioned the second one is, I wanted to make sure I understood the rationale for the second sentence, because to me, the first, I'm kind of open either way. I guess I'm just trying to be as succinct perhaps as possible and keep it to a belief. And in the first one, it does talk about maximum alignment of financial interests. So to me, it is making it clear that it's just financial interests. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk a little more about how you feel like the second sentence somehow helps illuminate more of the financial piece.
So
Is
You can
that,
go previous, you can go to
Hit previous?
Yeah, once you
And,
put Lynn back in it,
not yet, so,
keep going back then,
you have to click on them,
previous.
no, it doesn't go that, doesn't give me
Then what?
that.
can you click on her and move
Let
up?
me see. Move, speak now.
There we go. That's what I
Okay.
thought.
Thank
That's
you.
why
We
you're,
got it.
that's why you are Madam Chair.
She will always.
Ms. Paquin?
And
Thanks,
that's a
Dana.
good question, so Sharon, thank you. I think it's our feeling that the second sentence helps to clarify that it really is connected to the fees and the arrangements that we're making with our investment advisors. And for example, there's been issues that have been brought up in the past where a stakeholder doesn't like that we're using an investment advisor that then makes political contributions to an organization that is against their beliefs, and they're saying that we are providing fees to that person and we shouldn't be. So I think we're just trying to really narrowly focus on the impact on alignment of interest with our advisors and limit it to our investments.
Does that help, Ms. Hendricks? Okay, thank you. Ms. Higa?
Lynn answered my question.
Okay, very good. Mr. Rosensteel?
So I mean, I don't read A that way, but the concern I have with B is that I think what it says is that CalSTRS creates an alignment of financial interests with its external advisors. And then it says it's very limiting about how we do that. So utilizing clear contracts, it doesn't say what's in those contracts. Those contracts could have all sorts of conflicts of interest built into them. Doesn't say that we shouldn't have that. It only says that it should specify fees, doesn't say total compensation, just fees. Investment objectives and investment benchmarks. So there's a lot of other things that would need to be in a contract to ensure financial alignment of interests. I don't think I can support it the way it's written right now. I might be able to support it if we expanded that list a little bit. But now we're starting to get into policy. You know, utilizing clear contracts that mitigate or avoid financial conflicts of interest, that specify fees and other compensation, In other words, this is too limiting the way it's written right now. Or it could be just that by among other actions, utilizing clear contracts. I mean, in other words, I don't want, it's just too limiting this way. And so I'd like to see if you might be open to an amendment to this that broadens this list, or at least makes this list not exclusively just these four things.
Ms. Paquin, you want to respond to Mr. Rosensteel, please?
Thank you, and I
It's my
understand those
amendment.
concerns, Paul, and then given Alan's warning at the beginning of this item, not to try to wordsmith it completely from the dais, I wonder if it's better to, if it's possible, withdraw the motion and let Alan come back with additional language, if that is the pleasure of the committee.
You certainly have the right to withdraw the motion.
Actually, I think it's mine now.
Hold on a second.
That goes back to the original motion.
Yeah.
Does go back.
Well,
So it's back to Mr. Unterman. Then I would like to get to hear from Ms. Glazer-Hedrick, who's in the queue, and we can just give guidance to Mr. Emkin to come back with us and take a crack at it in November. Mr. Unterman.
Yeah, no, I'm actually comfortable with what Paul's saying, and you could do it with something like, among other things, clear contracts, period. And I think that gets there, because the contracts are much more complex, I agree. What I don't want to do is get off into a world where it's the contracts, but you're not a short seller, or you're not a gold investor, or that sort of thing. But if we just did it that way, among other things, clear contracts, I'm very comfortable.
So clear contracts, period,
Yeah.
and then striking the remainder?
Mhm.
Okay. Ms. Glazer-Hedrick.
Thank you. It does feel a little bit as if the second sentence in option B is getting more into the policy realm and outside of the belief realm. I did want to offer, to the extent that, Alan, you're going to redraft, I kind of like fiduciary counsel's recommendation that we talk about kind of capital at risks and shared incentives and shared exit strategies as the way that we're aligning financial interests. It seems like, talking about the way in which we're contracting with things, contracting with entities is how we are transparent about the way we're doing, about our alignment. But really, to the extent we're looking to align interest, I just like those concepts to be part of the belief system, rather than getting more into how we're implementing our belief system.
I would be uncomfortable with that.
Chris,
Because I saw Alan's recommendation, but when you think about it, so Blackstone came to us, and we're going to talk about our capital at risk versus theirs, and they're doing a fund it has an orthogonal purpose to ours. You get back into the whole purpose of question of what's maximal alignment or anything else. I mean, I think the answer is the way we invest is we hire people to manage funds with very clear objectives. And as long as the incentives in that contract are aligned with ours, we've got alignment. And, the fact that they are shorting a portfolio or investing heavily in commodities that are counter-cyclical to us or something like that is really not what matters, as long as they perform very well on our contract. And I think otherwise we get into quite a world of ambiguity and controversy.
Mr. Aylman, do you want to comment? And we're going to wrap it up.
Real quick, I just wanted to, for the record, note that Doug Orr, chair of the CFT Retirement Policy Committee, sent a motion or a memo to the board, which the chair has. The policy committee is recommending they like option 1 and 2. They were encouraging to look at 1, but just for the record, that letter was received.
So we're not going to do any more wordsmithing up here or amending. If it's okay with the group, what we'll do is we'll direct PCA to come back. What we have agreed on, in both, you'll bring back both A and B, striking the word maximum everywhere that it appears. If that was agreeable to everyone. In B, you're going to add the word such after, in the second sentence where it says CalSTRS creates such alignment. Those were the two changes that I saw that there was consensus on. Was there any other? Okay, well, Alan, would you bring back the items, please, as you've heard them, and check with the committee? Thank you very much. We'll move on back to, because we're not going to get it done, adopted today, so there's no reason to continue to debate it and discuss it. Okay, thank you. Item 15, Mike DeRay.
I thought we had something to sell. Okay, I think we do.
Roy Day and Mike Thompson and Mike DeRay with real estate. I'm going to turn this over to Mike. This is a fairly limited policy change that we submitted, and it is an action item. You have an opportunity to vote today. It is on. I guess I need to lean forward. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Mike Thompson. It's a fairly limited policy change, but a very brief presentation, and it is an action item. You can vote today, even though it's the first reading.
Okay, so our goal is to beat our benchmark, the Odyssey benchmark, and contribute to the fund outperformance. But we have a problem with our policy. And the problem is that the benchmark funds have a tool or strategy called transitional core. They call it non-core. We're calling it transitional core. So we'd like to add this strategy to our policy to create the same tool belt.
Well, essentially, the changes is limited to making a change to our leverage policy that allows us to have a higher level of leverage only on transitional assets, which would be no more than 20% of the core portfolio. Right now, that portion of the portfolio is around 5% and actually has never exceeded 10% in the last 5 years, I believe.
So,
and it mirrors the benchmark, yes.
no, that's it.
That's it.
So, Ms. Hedrick?
I would move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the recommendations and adopt them as appears in this revised policy, INV 93 through INV 95. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, without objection, it's moved and approved. Thank you. Thanks. Inflation-sensitive policy revision, item 16, Paul Shantic. Welcome, Paul.
Inflation-sensitive, Paul Shantic, Director of Inflation-Sensitive, policy revision in front of you, some minor word changes as well as a change in the portfolio moving from the inflation linker portfolio to a U.S. TIPS-based portfolio. That currently is run by fixed income under Glenn Hosokawa. Rosie acts as the portfolio manager on that portfolio. That relationship would continue. The portfolio would transition. In order to get a better tie-in with inflation in the U.S. versus international, and to eliminate a currency issues as well in the current policy. Are there any questions?
Ms. Hendricks.
Move approval.
Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Hendricks to approve the policy changes in this document, and it has accompanying a letter from both PCA and Makita supporting the proposed recommended change. It's moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Dillon. Questions or comments? Mr. Rosenstiel.
So, This is a concern I have about this benchmark and many others, which is that it seems to me the benchmark should be measuring how well staff does at achieving the objective that we seek with an asset class, given the universe of investments that staff can invest in. So if you look on INV 98, the purpose of this investment portfolio is the portfolio will seek to improve the diversification of the total investment portfolio and enhance its risk-adjusted total return. The assets shall be managed to generate current income and provide a modest level of capital appreciation. So within that, there's a very broad range of what staff could invest in. What we want is we want a benchmark to say whether staff is doing that, is accomplishing that goal. But instead, the benchmark is basically what within that large universe you decide to invest in. So the problem that I have is we shouldn't be defining the benchmark as what staff decides to invest in, because then staff is obviously going to meet the benchmark. We need to define the benchmark as the question of what is the universe of investment opportunities designed to achieve that, and then we measure whether staff does that or not. So I just have a real difficult time saying that the benchmark should be what you decide to invest in. It just seems to me backwards. It's sort of saying we're going to let we're not going to let the teacher say these are the test questions and you've got to get a 70% for a passing grade. It's sort of letting you decide which questions you want to answer, and then you can define what a passing grade is. So I'm not sure
From my standpoint, if I have a benchmark and it fits the inflation-sensitive portfolio in terms of the kinds of things that we want to accomplish with it, it's incumbent on me and incumbent on any manager externally or internally to figure out what is in that benchmark and how it can be beaten or at least tied, hopefully not underperform it dramatically over a time period. So selecting the benchmark is probably one of the more critical things that we do in determining what that universe looks like. When you say the universe, I'm not sure you want to necessarily say you can invest in fixed income around the world, because that's a big world. But if we can define it and shrink it into something that fits within what we think and what you eventually decide as policy is inflation sensitive, that gives us parameters around a portfolio when it comes time to build that portfolio.
See, here's the concern. I mean, I think it's our responsibility as the board to say, here's the asset class. Here's the objective of the asset class. It's your responsibility to say, here are the various strategies that could get us there. But then you have to make a decision about which of those strategies you will actually invest in. And it may be one today, and it may be a different one a year from now. But but instead what we're doing is we're defining the benchmark by what you actually do, not what your opportunity set is. So if you look on INV 98, at the bottom it says, as new strategies are added, the future benchmark shall be blended performance benchmark that will comprise the weightings for each of the strategies undertaken. Not strategies that you have the opportunity at your discretion to invest in, but the actual ones that you invest in. And so if we define the benchmark by what you do, then I don't know what we're measuring. And that's my conundrum here.
No, there's a there are two letters from our consultants. PCA comments on INV 115 and Makita comments on INV 117, letters that they've submitted for the record, that they concur with these changes. And I would ask that we hear what they say. So, Mr. Unterman?
Okay, well, there are two ways to think about this, and particularly to the extent we're talking about how we would measure performance for compensation purposes, this approach makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of logic to what Paul's saying too, as how do you set policy? But I think what we end up with in terms of benchmarks then that are so broad that they don't relate to the programs we have. It seems to me that if you are coming back and saying this, you're coming to us and saying, as a policy matter, this is the world I'm going to operate in, and these are the indices that will measure success. We've narrowed the universe. That's a policy decision the board you're asking us to make. It's one I'm prepared to make. And then this is how we're going to hold you accountable. It could be an easier test. It could be a much harder test than the broadest fixed income index imaginable. I'm comfortable with that. But it is sort of just two ways of looking at this coin. And I'm very comfortable with this way.
Thank you. Yeah, Neil.
Neil Rue, Managing Director at PCA. To try to answer your question, Paul, I think under the objective, you can see that there's an objective for the class. It's CPI. It says, that in and of itself is gray, but could be revised to be more specific. But it says CPI must exceed the U.S. CPI essentially over the long term by a reasonable level. Now you could put you could be more specific on reasonable level, but that's the objective of the class. If over a investment cycle or two, Paul and his team are not achieving CPI plus a reasonable, not outperforming CPI, you've got a problem with the class, and Paul should be held accountable for that. The challenge with the class is that there are many vehicles that are available to Paul that really, quite frankly, don't have very good benchmarks associated with them, and yet we have to judge Paul on his ability to implement across all of those segments. And his class is evolving, and so what he's done at this point is put in those particular segments where he does have exposure, but he's also, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, he's also projecting to you that he's going to be bringing other segments into this class, such as agriculture and timber, et cetera, that he's researching right now that will, and he's projecting out to you that there's going to be, those areas are going to be benchmarked, and they're going to be weighted accordingly as he brings them to you. So instead of, and I think from time to time you would see how he's defined it in the beginning part of that paragraph. That will get more specific as he brings other segments into the portfolio. For example, timber and agriculture will also be defined in there at some other point. But he does have a bogey, and the bogey is CPI, and that's what it's not an investment universe in a sense, but it is the objective of this class.
Was there any more on this particular topic? Because I have something.
You're
Okay.
on.
Now I got to get back to my page. I think it's under inflation sensitive in the rewrite in the policy.
Do you have a page number, Dana?
So I'm trying to get back to it. It talks about, it's I-35. IMV of 135. So it's under inflation sensitive structure. We've added the word structure. We've changed some language in the second to last and last sentences where it talks about we're changing the language from that the initial portfolio will be comprised and that strategies may be added, and we're changing that to be from that future tense to a past tense. And I guess kind of like other policies that we've had, once we've gotten there, we don't need to say that that's where we were. Why can't we just get rid of both sentences?
Do we? Next item.
You're ahead of us, you're jumping ahead of us.
You're such an overachiever, Dana.
Well, see, I was inflation sensitive.
Yeah,
I was on inflation
we're all very
sensitive.
sensitive today.
We're
We're all very sensitive today.
Yes, we are.
Okay,
A lot of
so y'all remember
sensitivity.
my comment
That's not a
then.
negative thing, it's just observation.
See, that's why I was going back to see if I was on the right
Yes.
inflation
No, we're
sensitive
still on Mr.
thing.
Paul Shantik's.
Never mind.
Yeah. All right, so the motion on the floor is to adopt the staff recommended changes. It's been concurred by Makita and PCA with their letters to us supporting the recommended changes. Any other discussion on the item? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Neil. Now, Dana.
I don't need to repeat it.
Chris, item 17, investment policy and management plan, the asset class
I've
policy.
just had an epiphany that we need to delete the last two sentences on 135.
I'm so glad you're having these epiphanies, Chris.
Looked at it and was like, those are useless.
We're done. Let's get rid of them.
All of these changes primarily, I think virtually all of them, were changes that you made to prior asset class policies during the entire year. So that's why we listed them as housekeeping. I did not include any dramatic new additions. They are all just matching the prior policies. Dana's suggestion, INV 135, is fine with us. That would be the one sort of new change to this. But this is your overall investment policy.
Thank you.
Open for questions.
Questions? Ms. Hendricks?
Any other changes, Dana?
I'd propose we move with the amendment from Dana.
Okay, it's been moved to adopt the recommended changes with the appropriate amendment on INV 135 as mentioned by Ms. Dillon. Is there a second? Okay, it's moved and properly second. Mr. Rosensteel?
So I didn't want to say anything more about that last topic, but the last issue, since Dana had moved us on to the next one. But now that we're on this next one, there is that same issue for me, and it's on INV 125. And all I would do is, I think Tom put it well, what we keep struggling with benchmarks is that on the one hand, benchmarks are used to measure fund performance, and on the other hand, benchmarks are used to make compensation decisions. And they're both important, and I'm not going to say one is more important than the other, but I think the way we design our benchmarks and that they reflect so much what staff actually does invest in, that they function better for compensation purposes than for measuring the performance of the fund. And I would just, as a member of this committee, ask that, you know, maybe in the future, a little bit more consideration be given to the way to balance the two objectives. We do that in private equity. We have a short-term and a long-term, and they're different, you know, they're different benchmarks. But I just think that we need to think about that a little bit more.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask Mr. McCourt and Neil representing PCA to work with me to find a way to incorporate some of the concerns that have been raised. They seem to be legitimate, and probably need some. I'll need some guidance on how to navigate that so we can address it as we've done in private equity. So we'll do that. Okay. Thank you for that, Paul. Mr. Aylman.
One thing I would add to Paul's comments, and it's kind of interesting, we're so close, and the staff level, we're into not the weeds, we're into the ground. It is really helpful sometimes to have to back up and look at the big picture. And this actually came up, Paul, what you're raising hit on something exactly that came up from Karen Yamamoto yesterday. She is, looking at this fresh for the first time, being very diligent, and one of her key questions, and the nuance you're picking up, every other asset class up until, I'm going to say, the year probably 2004, the objective for the asset class was to invest in that benchmark. So the objective for stocks is to invest in global stocks as defined as. And so the benchmark and the objective, I perfectly matched. But when we created inflation sensitive, it was the first time we created an asset class that wasn't a specific security, it was a characteristic. And so therefore the objective is to capture the characteristic, And how do you define benchmarks that then measure that characteristics? And you're bringing up a great point. That's where we're having the breakdown. We're used to defining it as a specific investment area, and inflation sensitive is designed to capture a characteristic. Risk mitigating strategies is the other asset class that's a concept to capture a characteristic, not a specific security. And you're right. I don't think we've done a good enough job to define and match the objective, and then also recognize there are benchmarks. And the long-term benchmark needs to be capturing that characteristic. So it's kind of, Karen pointed out there was a sudden subtle shift made in about '04 to different styles, and this is the implications of it. So thank you for bringing that up and bringing it to our attention. I think we'll all think about it better.
Ms. Yamamoto?
Hi. On the same page, third sentence that it starts with, since almost all those asset classes, benchmarks for CalSTRS, exclusions, and special mandates are not publicly available. I wasn't sure what that means, and if it's not publicly available, then how can members and the public, is that what that means, the public, compare the total fund performance?
We have to buy those benchmarks. You have to subscribe specifically to get these specialized, customized benchmarks. So that's why if you went to the MSCI page, you're not going to find the X, all of our lists. We have to buy it from them, and then we publish it. But the name is getting so long, it was kind of the recognition that virtually all of your benchmarks are just customized to CalSTRS. We then publish them out to the public under our branded name, in essence.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yamamoto. Okay, seeing no other people that want to speak on the item, there's a motion to approve the recommendations, the policy changes supported by Makita and PCA. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Item 18, Pension 2 Investment Policy Revision. Chris?
There again, changes fairly straightforward. The administrative structure, open to your comments and questions. Harvey raised some good questions I don't have answers to, but I'll turn it over to him and legal counsel. The area of defined contribution oversight is constantly evolving. I still think we're actually ahead of the curve in that we have a defined benefit staff overviewing it. One of Harvey's questions was, how does the board monitor this program? The Benefits and Services Committee really monitors the business plan and who we're bidding, where we're bidding, and where we're providing that. And then you, as the investment committee, oversee the options that are provided under that program. But as we've made the important point, you do not pick the actual investments. You don't pick the asset allocation. That's participant directed, pardon me. All you're required to do is to pick the menu and have an adequate set of options for them to pick. You're also safeguarded in that a participant can go through a brokerage window and pick a plethora of options. So you have standard options, you have target portfolios, and then you have the entire scary world. So that policy is before you. PCA, as your general consultant, works to provide advice on that project as well.
Ms. Ortega.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. I had a couple questions on this. On INV 150, kind of in the description of the changes or of the policy, there's a discussion. It says that the current load of investment staff time is not sustainable at the present asset value, nor is it required with the established investment menu. So I wanted to understand, are you making the point that continuing at the staffing level that you have is not sustainable from your management perspective of your responsibilities? And continuing to charge that cost to the program then is not going to keep the fees low enough to make the program, Pension 2, competitive.
That's a fair statement. Pension 2 doesn't generate enough to even pay the time we're contributing right now to it. And so it's a challenge that you could, I guess, in theory, charge the fully loaded rate. But you're right, it would not be a competitive product in the marketplace.
So then I think my follow-up question is, are we, by not assisting the program or providing that level of staffing to it, are we diminishing the quality of the program in any way in order to keep the cost competitive? And I ask that question because it still remains, even if we're not choosing the funds, and it still remains a product that is under the reputation of the board, right? And so that's where I'm trying to understand, are we pulling away from it in order to keep it competitive on the cost basis, but then are we putting any risk on the quality of the program, and does that make sense over the long term?
Yeah, in my professional judgment, it has an established menu, and we have adequate and can continue to provide adequate oversight of the options in the menu. It was when we were building it out and also transitioning from the Pension 2 program was really overseen by the benefits and services staff, but then came to the investment committee and the investment staff. I think we're now in a stabilization phase. If we were going to change the options or the menu dramatically, then we'd have to ramp back up the staff commitment. But I think I am making a judgment call based on the size of the program and the stability of it, that I think we can manage it with this level of staffing. And provide that quality.
Kind of properly calibrating the resources.
There you
Chris and his staff, it's relatively new, their role in this, and I don't think we all knew exactly what the balance of resource was right for the program. And they also found some creative ways to find some efficiencies in the performance reporting to minimize the cost. So it was really a way of looking at the resource allocation, getting it right. And, we're still going to benefit from Chris's personal expertise, obviously, in the program. So I think we're comfortable as a whole in the organization with that balance.
And then on INV 155, this is more of a technical question, I guess. This reference to financial engines, is that a product or okay, can someone elaborate a little bit on that? And the comment was not clear, so I didn't really understand what the...
I don't know, Sandy. Yep, Sandy's here. She's coming forward. Who runs the program. The Pension 2 staff felt it was important to add that into this policy because they use this in the bidding documents and things. But it was recognizing that with our product comes a financial advisory service to the participants so that they can figure out, are they saving enough for retirement? Are they similar to the Savings Plus program for the state? Now, a lot of people are providing some kind of financial education.
So is Financial Engines?
It's a company. It's a very powerful web-based program that allows you to evaluate your investments. And
so I don't know if you all remember, but after we transitioned to Voya, they came and did a presentation on their My Orange Money, and that's powered by Financial Engines. So that's where if individuals can do on their own and go in and put their information, and then it will give them a projection of if they're in the red, yellow, or green for their retirement to fill that gap. And so that portion is that Financial Engines they can do on their own, but then they can also get advice services that then they could work with Financial Engine advisors, and there is an additional fee to do that. So that is incorporated as a product within the program.
In the 401k world, it's a very popular product for employers to use since you can't really provide the manpower to provide all that education and advice, and it's been out in the market a long time now, actually.
And it's important to point out in the policy, Neil was highlighting to me, that you're providing a product to provide the financial education. You are not responsible for the financial education of the participants.
I would just, I appreciate Raina's questions because I had those same questions for Chris when I initially read the item. It's a great product that's being provided as an option for our members. And, it's really aligned with our core mission, which is ensuring the retirement security of California's educators. And we know that their defined benefit is not going to be adequate in and of itself, and they have to do more. And these products are at some of the lowest costs possible. So I would just ask that if and when we get to a time where additional resources are needed, or we have to think about how it's managed differently, it would be a nice problem to have where more educators are choosing this option. And it's a relatively straightforward program for people to access. But if the quality is compromised or the price goes up, then it's not what we hope and want it to continue to be. So just keep us updated, please. Ms. Hendricks?
And I too appreciate Arena's questions, because they're the questions I had too. I hadn't heard about the financial engines piece before with FOIA. So at some point, I know for benefits and services, it might be helpful next year or sometime in the next to kind of maybe bring FOIA in and have more of a conversation around that for the benefits and services committee. So as I read through this, it seems like the main piece is around decreasing investment staff participating on this committee, right, Chris? So we'll have one investment officer participating on the committee. And I assume that decision, Sandy, your team has been involved in that, and I'm guessing you feel comfortable with that level of change on the committee at this point. Okay.
I think it's important, Sharon,
Yeah.
the governance you have to understand is this committee then reports to me
Right,
on the
right.
option. So,
I
and
totally get
it. Now with the record keeper FOIA, I get the reports directly as well, and Sandy and Andrew and I are all able to look at that stuff. So in this mutual fund lineup, you don't go and change managers, you don't defund them, you don't have that choice. All you can do is take them as an option or add somebody else. So we're not going to change the menu dramatically unless there is a significant problem. And even then, all you can do is drop it as an option and hope the members move, unless you're really having a problem where then you can map them. But you don't change the menu, it's like a restaurant. You don't dramatically change the menu all the time.
Our district has 50 options.
50 options?
50 options.
Which I can tell you, and we've seen that. You had, now I can't remember his name, from UCLA present to you. That creates the investor psychology, that creates investment brain freeze. And they don't make a decision and they default to cash or some terrible option. You have to have a nice, clean, simple menu that they can look at.
And we do.
So with that, I would move approval of the policy, and just with the caveats of just, monitoring and make sure we ensure the same level of quality that we always have.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to adopt the changes. Mr. Rosensteel?
Yeah, I'm fine with this. I was just, Harvey did raise some questions about our fiduciary duty and things like that, and those piqued my interest to have answers to those questions. So I don't know whether there are answers available now, or whether, Brian, you'll come back with answers about, whether the new fiduciary rules change now our responsibility, as well as the question of fiduciary insurance. So I'd appreciate answers to that at some point.
So we can have those a formal, as a request for information, a response and follow up to what extent do the new fiduciary rules affect and impact our responsibilities over pension 2, as well as insurance matters to the extent we're affected or not affected. So if you could bring that back to us at the appropriate time.
Just one other thought. I was just whispering to Brian here that after Chris was talking through that, I wondered if tomorrow, I think we should, no, it just went off my screen. I think tomorrow when we do the Benefits and Services Committee, look at the charter. I'm not sure we've, maybe, Sandy, I would appreciate maybe you look at it as well. It's a very generic charter, the responsibilities of the committee. And we should think about whether there should be specific oversight responsibilities to what you just said, Chris, a minute ago, because I just see it's not actually recognized there. And maybe we need a complete picture of that better. So let's think about that for tomorrow.
That was one of my other comments, was just how, as we make this change, how does that impact benefits and services and kind of our scope? So I'd appreciate your opinion tomorrow, Sandy, when we talk.
Good. Ms. Yamamoto?
I just have a question. It relates to INV 159 and the participants. If a participant chooses pension 2, does it mean that that person has 2 choices? So follow what the advisory committee is that investing principle? Or then they do their self-directing brokerage window? Can they do a combination? Does it have to be the same throughout their life of pension 2?
No. They
So-
can change it, modify it,
Yeah.
adjust
Okay.
resources.
All right.
The brokerage window is just an escape from the structured, that we give them. And
Because I wasn't understanding it that way. And then also, when it refers to the program record keeper and the employers on page 158, if the employers, do they have an option? Do they have an option to do this if the pension, if it doesn't work for the participants? Or, I wasn't sure about how that works.
Well, actually, Sandy, do you want to provide a broader overview of the employer piece of it? This is a bit of a complicated piece in terms of the law around
Right.
the employer's rights to offer 403B plans and how we get into that.
So within the 403B market space, there's multiple vendors. So we administer the 403B Compare website, which now we have 60 different vendors that are registered on that. Those vendors can offer a multitude of different products. So like when Mike did the demo for all of you, and we could do that for you too, Karen, or any of you who want to see it again, that out of that, they choose a vendor. So Pension 2 is a vendor. Pension 2, if they choose us, they have the option of our core fund lineup, our easy choice portfolios, which are our target date funds, or they can go into the self-directed brokerage account and select any other mutual fund out there that they choose to. But within that marketplace, you have annuity vendors, you have Vanguard, there's 60 other vendors, and then they offer a multitude of those different products as well. And then the employers, they're responsible if a product vendor comes to them and that product vendor is listed on 403B Compare, then they should have them as a product provider. So like Sharon said, her district has 50 different product vendors. Some districts have all 60. Others may only have 20, 25. So it kind of depends per district what vendors that they have. Did that help? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Karen's on benefits and services, so I want to make sure you get.
Pension 2, if we're able to drive our members to pension 2, it is they're high quality, low cost, low fees, the Vanguards, passively managed emerging market equities at like almost free.
Yeah.
That's almost free, what teachers are paying. And it was a response to, too many options, teachers making bad choices because they don't have the right information. It's simple, it's user-friendly, and the alignment of interest is pretty much aligned with, we've got your interest at heart, members of CalSTRS, and you need to be doing more to save, and if you can, this is probably the best avenue. And we're not going to throw 100 options for you, here are 10. So it's really a great program. We just have to make sure that we continue to support it. And we know we have the likes of Chris, having say over what buttons our teachers are getting to choose. And, it's really great. So we just have to make sure we can build on it. All right. All right, so there's a motion to approve it. Any opposition to that? Seeing none, the item is approved. The changes are adopted.